Hi, this is Andrew at Westchester Residential Opportunities, and this video is part of our series on the basics of the fair housing laws. The normal caveats and disclaimers apply. This presentation is being prepared in April of 2020 and may not be accurate on any other date. Also, we're not providing legal advice in this video. If you need legal advice, please engage a lawyer. So today we're going to look at the exemptions or exceptions to the law under three different laws that apply in Westchester County where we principally operate. Those are the Federal Fair Housing Act, the New York State Human Rights Law, which contains its fair housing laws, and Westchester County's fair housing law. Wherever you are, if it's not Westchester County, the laws that apply to you will be different. For example, we also do work in Rockland County, in which case that county's laws would apply and not Westchester's. Makes sense, right? So you have to know where you are engaged in a housing transaction first to figure out then what the applicable laws are. Since they have broader applicability, we will generally focus on the Federal Fair Housing Act and the New York State Human Rights Law today. So if you watch some of our other videos, I hope you've learned a bit about how the fair housing laws work to protect the civil rights of everyone in this country. But in order to really understand how the fair housing laws apply to any given situation, you need to know when they do not apply. And so today we're going to run down the various exceptions to the laws. Also, you will notice that the exceptions are different between the laws. So you may have instances where, for example, the conduct is illegal under New York State's law, but not under the federal law. That is important to know and understand, particularly if you are deciding whether and where to file a complaint or a lawsuit. Now, compromises are made in getting laws passed, and one of the compromises built into virtually all fair housing laws is an exemption referred to as the Mrs. Murphy exemption. Now, Mrs. Murphy was probably a fictional character and not the woman pictured here, but in that story, she was a really nice little old widow who was trying to make ends meet and hold on to the family house by renting out a room or two to strangers. And the theory was that this nice old lady should get to decide who lives in her own house without fear of reprisal under the fair housing laws. Does this make sense? Do we want to let Mrs. Murphy be a bigot? I don't know. But this exception you will find in some form in each of the three fair housing laws we're looking at today. And the requirements to meet the exemption are several. First, rental of a room or of an apartment. Second, in a home that's owner occupied, meaning the owner has to actually live there. And last, it's only if it's a 1 or 2 family home under New York law, or a 1 to 4 family home under the federal and Westchester County law. So right there, you can see how the specific facts presented, for example, an owner occupied 3 family home, could mean that the exemption applies under both the federal and county law, but not under the state law. So if you wanted to sue that poor old widow, you'd want to do it under the New York state law. The next exception we'll look at is called the single family home exception. Here's another instance where New York law is more restrictive than federal and county law, more restrictive in the sense that it has less exceptions. Both the federal and county laws have an exception for the sale or rental of a single-family home by the owner, as long as these several conditions are met, including not using an agent or discriminatory advertisement and the other requirements here. I think the policy decision here is that an individual homeowner who is basically conducting a real estate transaction on their own shouldn't necessarily be expected to know the fair housing laws. Again, I'm not sure that's a sensible or fair policy, but presumably this is a pretty limited corner of the real estate market. New York State apparently doesn't agree and has no such exception. So of course, some exceptions have their own exceptions, just to keep us all on our toes. These exemptions we've just discussed, in particular the Mrs. Murphy exemption, don't apply to brokers and agents. They are supposed to know the law. Similarly, with the single-family home exception, you'll recall the one requirement is that the homeowner is not using a broker agent, so that exception won't apply if they are involved. They also don't apply to the prohibitions on making discriminatory advertisements, notices, and statements. So even Mrs. Murphy can't put out an ad saying no families with children or Latinos need apply. Note also that in some of the laws, federal and county in particular, these provisions also apply to making statements, which can be oral. So that means it can be a separate violation of the fair housing laws to say something discriminatory, even if you were just saying it to one person. Last, please remember the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was passed into law over the objections of President Andrew Johnson, which we see here. This is a Reconstruction era law that was really the first Fair Housing Act. And the government takes the position that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 makes it illegal to discriminate based on race or color, maybe national origin or religion in some opinions. And there are no exceptions to this law. So there are no exemptions under that law when dealing with at least race and color. Okay, this bucket of exceptions I'm loosely terming affinity housing. Again, each of the laws we're talking about are different, but most accept out housing, which by its terms only allows same-sex residents, and those are exempt from the protections for sex and gender. For example, a woman's only dormitory or a YMCA that only houses men. Next, housing operated for other than commercial purposes by a religious organization or a private club that limits occupancy to its members or gives preference in residency to its members. And last, senior housing. Both the federal and state law allow for and promote housing that's available just for seniors, and therefore exempt it from the age and familial status protections that would otherwise apply. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. WRO's Fair Housing Department is actively engaged in community outreach and education to make sure housing providers and the public understand fair housing laws. And WRO also actively investigates compliance with the law. We analyze zoning laws and building policies, and we test housing providers. When appropriate, WRO brings enforcement actions against providers who break the law. So thanks for watching our video. If you are aware of housing discrimination, please reach out to us to report it. As we're creating this video during the pandemic, we are not currently in the office. The easiest way to reach us is by email. We have a staff directory on our website. You can see that address on the screen here. Email anyone in the Fair Housing Department. And while you're visiting that website, please take a moment to support WRO by clicking the donate button. Housing is always essential. We're here to help. Like, subscribe, and share this video, and please follow us on social media.